A vaccine passport has been something that's discussed recently in news. Some people say it could be necessary for travel, concerts, returning to the workplace, an idea many Americans have very mixed feelings about. Last night on CNN, Chris Cuomo asked Dr. Asha Jha for his opinion on vaccine passports. Here's why he thinks they will become, quote, inevitable.
Vaccine passport, good idea, bad idea?
I think it's a little bit inevitable at this point. I mean, I think a lot of companies are going to be demanding it. If the government doesn't get involved in it, you'll see a lot of private ventures doing it. Countries are going to demand it if Americans want to travel to those places. So I think of it as sort of inevitable. We just got to make sure we do it in a way that's fair to people and protects people's privacy.
Meanwhile, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis vowed to take some sort of executive action against a mandate on vaccine passports. Let's watch that.
I think this is something that has huge privacy implications. It is not necessary to do. We're going to have hit 3.5 million seniors that have gotten shots sometime this week, likely 75% of seniors. It's important to be able to do it. But at the same time, we are not going to have you provide proof of this just to be able to live your life normally. And I'm going to be taking some action in an executive function, emergency function here very shortly.
Joining us now to discuss is editor-in-chief of The Real News and host of the Working People podcast, Maximilian Alvarez, and also culture editor at The Federalist, Emily Jashinsky. And Emily, let me start with you on this one. So basically the idea is this. Let's say you want to take a flight. You got to show your vaccine passport to prove that you've been inoculated against coronavirus in order to board the flight. As one potential example here, advocates are saying, hey, look, kids already got to prove that they have proper vaccinations for their age in order to go to public school. So this isn't that different from what we're already doing in other sectors of society. What do you think?
I mean, it's on a much, much, much wider scale, a much vaster scale. And it's one thing if American Airlines says, I need you to provide proof of your vaccination in order to board this flight. It's an entirely different thing if the government says, I need you to provide proof of your vaccination in order to do ABC, like everything in life. Because I'm among the people that was saying, like, listen, what we're seeing over here on college campuses, it's a slippery slope. And people were like, that sounds crazy. That's not a slippery slope. I don't mean to sound like somebody like petting my copy of like 1984 and but this is like actually this is something that's a really slippery slope. We heard on that CNN clip, he said we have to make sure we do it fairly and we do it in a way that protects people's privacy. Does anybody trust the federal government right now to do that in a way that is fair and protects people's privacy? It's what they're like terrible at above all things. And so entrusting the federal government to sort of like take this step where they're normalizing mandated information about our health in order to access all of these various sectors of public and private life, I think is extremely dangerous, and people should be freaked out that if we do take that step, the government is going to be really comfortable starting to mandate a lot of other things.
So I will say, Emily, what has come out is the Biden administration is basically saying, look, we are not going to require vaccine passports. But they're like, it's cool if you want to a private business. Max, that's where my question is for you. This is what I wanted to talk about with you guys is, look, whether you like it or not, there's an organic backlash towards this vaccine. There are a lot of people, especially young Republican men in particular, who don't want to take it. Now, the question is this mandating this type of policy going to make things better or worse? I'm generally of the opinion it could make things worse. I'm curious for your perspective.
I mean, it could make things worse in the sense that it will elicit kind of a stronger response from people, right? Yes. That kind of drives them in the other way, right? I mean, like Emily was just saying, I think the thing to kind of underscore is that as far as the slippery slope goes, we're already down the slope, right? I mean, if you're worried about being surveilled, tough cookies, you're being surveilled. You've been surveilled for a long time, and it's not just the government. I think that's one of the kind of false equivalencies there. Like we were just doing a segment on Amazon. Amazon's watching you, Google's watching you, Facebook's watching you. They're all watching you, and they're selling your data to other people who are watching you. Like that ship has sailed. It's not just about whether or not it's the government doing it. Big Brother is all around you right now, and we have kind of let that happen over years and decades. I remember when I saw Chelsea Manning give a talk in Ann Arbor when I was living back in Michigan. She said something that really stuck with me. She said, I got released from prison and all I see around me is more prison, right? And I think about that a lot because of the ways that workers themselves are surveilled. I see it in the ways that poor and working class people are surveilled through, things like credit, through bosses, watching what they post on social media. A lot of our information is kind of already out there. So I guess the real kind of question about what this means going forward, right, is how this is going to essentially kind of serve the purposes of not addressing the root problems that we are going to be facing and are currently facing in the rest of the 20th century, whether it be climate change, whether it be like, a harried race for resources or geopolitical realignment, right, yada, yada, yada. There's going to be this rush to kind of, instead of making the problem better for everybody, we're going to create systems that basically allow a few people to get past the rope in front of the club and everyone else is kind of kept out. That's what I see kind of brewing with this sort of passport talk.
Yeah, that's my concern.
Well, and Max, so I actually have complicated feelings about this because on the one hand, I think, look, we live in a society, we live close together, and this is the sort of thing, look, if you want to do whatever you want to do in your life and it doesn't affect anybody else, then go do it. I don't care. But if this is an action that can affect the people who are vulnerable around you. And so I think that people have a responsibility to meet these basic levels of not hurting the people around them in their lives and a responsibility to society. So I feel that way. And then on the other hand, there's a weird ideological tension here because it's Republicans by and large who are upset about this, who are saying we can't have this big brother, and it's really not the federal government that they're worried about. These are private companies that are talking about requiring these vaccine passports. So the argument from the libertarian right would be they're private companies. They can do whatever they want. But then I also feel that's not my view, right? I think corporate power is perhaps a graver threat to the freedom of Americans than even federal government power because it is wildly unconstrained and because we all know how corporate interests drive everything in America. So I just think there's a lot actually going on within this one question.
There really, really is. I mean, and I guess to kind of underscore the last point that you made, I think, if anything, I hope people take that away from this, right? That I think I've said as much in past segments on here, right? That what we call the market is a form of government. We just don't call it that, right? Yeah. Because we've been conditioned to believe that there is this kind of division between the market and government, and I think that. To make your point, Crystal, you have issues here in Baltimore, right? Public schools are kind of doing what they can to adjust to kind of coronavirus. But the fact that Comcast as a company has such a stranglehold over a basic kind of public necessity like internet has basically made a lot of those plans impossible to execute or very difficult to execute. So that is the private market kind of holding kind of the bag for what the public, governmental side is actually trying to do. That's the case in so many other areas of our life where, the forces of the market are the things that are actually dictating what we can and can't do.
Emily, let me get you in on that because, on the corporate side, this is where I think there is a fundamental tension within the right and the coalition, which is that you have voters who are no, I don't want this whatsoever. I've already seen organic people saying, well, look, it's not like we can tell American Airlines who has to fly on their company or not, but actually we can. There's a whole no-fly list, et cetera. So I guess the question is how are people going to grapple with this? Because I see it becoming an organic, small L libertarian, hardcore backlash if this were to be instituted, but the policy there is very unclear.
Well, okay, so here's the thing. If a bunch of people don't want to take this or don't want this to happen when they fly an airplane and American Airlines is mandating it, then fly on another airline. But you can't do that with Amazon and Apple. Right. We can't this is a conversation, again, it always comes up. It's a conversation about corporate power and the centralization of corporate power in just a few entities. And so if libertarians are, get rankled by this, I mean, that's a really, you should want a healthy economy, and a healthy economy involves sort of, tending to the monopolies. And that's a key part of this. I think, the other element that's really important from my perspective is that you you mentioned sort of the ideological divide in people who are scared of vaccine passports. Andrew Cuomo, this is something he's proposed on the state level. I should have been clear earlier that I was talking about more of a stepping stone to the federal level. But if the state level Republicans are more skeptical of moves like this, that's because you have a whole lot of people who have very good reasons not to trust any of our institutions, and that may manifest in ways that are problematic and are based on disinformation. Absolutely. But nobody has any interest in addressing that fundamental distrust that people have in so many of these institutions. Mandating things like this is a great way to just throw fuel on that fire. And I completely understand that we want people to be in safe environments and people need to be making good decisions for each other. But we also have to address this absolutely raging skepticism and distrust in all of the institutions. And when we look at people, maybe Republican men that are skeptical of something like this, and we say, gosh, what's wrong with you? You're like, read the news. It's not that easy. It's not that easy at all. They have nobody to trust in the news, and they have very good reason not to trust anybody in the news.
I agree with you 100%. It's something we try and talk about here every day. That's the core problem that we have. Stick with us, guys. Thanks very much. Next on Rising, our friend Chuck Rocha is going to tell us about a new study. It digs into the issues that drive Latino voter turnout in the 2020 election. That's when Rising returns.